right, everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk About the Real Shit. I am Naomi, and I've got my partner in crime with me, Lori, again with me tonight.
Hey, peeps.
We are really excited tonight because us girls get to sit in the studio with our dear friend Rickman. Say hi, Rickman.
Hello.
You can jump in at any time.
Okay.
Anyways, he's our neighbor. I just really started getting to know him, but Lori, you've known him for a while, right?
Yeah, he's a bit more than a neighbor.
Yeah, totally.
We've kind of gone through a couple of journeys together, mostly growth and spiritual. I would say are kind of our paths.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, we're excited to talk to Rickman about some good stuff tonight, but we're going to start it off with Lori's badass thought of the day.
All right, here we go. Our, quote, realities are, quote, our make-believe. Whatever we make ourselves believe, we experience.
Yeah.
Does that set us up for this evening, people?
That actually, immediately what that makes me think of is, I was talking about it in one of the podcasts recently about Darren Brown, and he has this saying that I've always loved. It says, we believe the stories we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about that is going back to Lego and all the stories that Lego's told me that I've been reprogramming. Now, moving forward, whatever stories I start telling myself about myself and who I want to be or who I can become.
Yeah. Our minds are incredible, and we can convince ourselves of anything. I've actually seen people who can absolutely 100% believe their own lies. You know,
don't go there.
But we also have different social settings too, where we're out and we put our best, face on, and who maybe we want to be is who we are in certain social situations, but who we really are is something completely different. So it's a good way to start off. Good thought of the day. All right, Rickman, I am really excited to actually just start getting into the good stuff tonight. He just went on a pretty magical journey. Why don't you tell our listeners what that journey was real quick before we get to see who you are?
Well, I had the good fortune of traveling to Europe. I flew to Spain and I walked a 500-mile ancient pilgrimage trail called the Camino de Santiago.
That's so awesome.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. That's how many days did it take you?
The journey was 500 miles and it took 36 days of walking. I took one break about day 22 in Lyon, which we'll talk a little bit about. But 15 miles a day on average and 36 days.
Wow. So before we really start going into that, so that's what we're going to talk about tonight, guys. What do you do for the JOB?
As a JOB, I've been in Portland for about 22 years. I graduated Oregon State back in the early 80s.
Nice.
But I'm a civil engineer and I work in large-scale commercial and civil construction projects, mostly with concrete.
Wow.
And so that's what I do.
So you build the foundation?
I build the structure of the building.
Oh, okay.
So parking garages, bridges, dams, high-rise, mid-rise, low-rise, water treatment, airports, zoo, all kinds of fun things that are built out of concrete.
I just have to say, I love concrete.
You do love concrete. Lori's been on a couple of our jobs. And in fact, the building that we're sitting in is a concrete job that we worked on. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So we helped build this very building. Yes, it's fine. You're good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Rickman's actually built Portland, a big part of Portland.
Yeah, we should go on a drive one day and point. I'm very interested. Yeah, totally.
Right,
it's very interesting hearing all the little secrets of Portland and what's going on.
Yeah.
So 22 years. Where were you before that?
Well, let's see. After I graduated college, I went to Eastern Washington, lived in the Tri-Cities, California for a period of time, and then ended up in Hawaii.
Nice.
From 89 to 96, and then back to Tacoma, and then eventually back to Portland. So
wow, I bet Tacoma
always West
was
Coast.
Really rough after Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaii was interesting. Transitioning back to the mainland, I went to Tacoma. And I lived in Gig Harbor for a year with my family
Gig
at that
Harbor is
time.
not bad. Gig Harbor
And
is
Gig
not
Harbor
like
was
the
kind of a
armpit
nice,
Tacoma.
easy transition back from the mainland or from the Hawaiian Islands. So
wow, that's cool. So you're a West Coast gypsy.
I'm
like
a West
myself.
Coast gypsy.
That's what I say.
Yeah, totally.
I'm
The best of all worlds, actually.
I'm a world gypsy.
You are. You totally are. I can take you to all the great camping spots and hot springs on the entire West Coast. It's good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about, like, when was your trip?
The trip started in May, late May. The trip actually began when I saw a movie called The Way, which is a Hollywood film produced and acted. Emilio Estevez and Martin Sheen produced this movie in 2012. And it's about the Camino de Santiago trail. And Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez in real life are father and son. And they play father and son in the movie. And the movie was the inspiration for me wanting to walk the Camino. And if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's a very, very well done movie. But
I feel like I've seen it, but it's been a while.
I have seen it.
Yeah, so Emilio Estevez is a 40-something-year-old. He and his father have an estranged relationship since their mother died. We don't know how that happened in the movie, but he wants to basically quit his job and travel the world. He was pursuing a PhD, very successful businessman, and decided he wanted to see the world. And he embarked on this Camino de Santiago trip, and on his first day out, he passes away. We don't know how in the movie. So his father flies to France, which is where the trail starts, in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, just across the Spanish border, identifies a body, finds out what his son's up to, didn't realize what was going on, and ends up walking the Camino de Santiago for his son, with his son's ashes. And that spiritual journey was very moving for me, and made me want to do the Camino.
And one of the things I appreciated about that movie is the father's whole kind of attitude at the beginning, and then how his attitude changes throughout the journey, as I'm sure most humans that are on that trek, that changes. But also that he used all of his son's equipment that was there to complete the journey. The backpack and everything was his son's equipment.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, it was a very touching movie. And so that was my inspiration. And that was back in 2012. And since that time, I've had a life transition. I was married, had children. They've all grown and gone. I've gone through a small divorce that happened a couple of years ago. And so the Camino for me was kind of an opportunity to kind of look forward to what was going to be my next step in life. You know, I was in transition, major transition, and the Camino was part of that process.
I think it sounds like it was a good place for you to work through all of the past things so that you could move forward. Because don't you think when you're walking that much every single day, you have time to think about a lot of things. So you're working through a lot of... Well,
and I've always wanted to travel. I've always wanted to backpack Europe. So that was kind of a boyhood dream realized. But yeah, I mean, when you walk day after day after day, and the other thing was, what's it like not to have to work? You know, a lot of my job, huge pressures every day, but I wanted to know what it was like to kind of not do that anymore, kind of like a mini retirement. Did I want to travel internationally?
Right.
Did I want to be retired? Did I want to try something new? So those were all questions I had when I set out on the Camino.
I can only imagine what it's like to be able to wake up in the morning and the only thing that you have to do that day is walk. And yeah, you might have your goal of 15 miles or however far you wanted to walk that day. And if you get there, great. And if you don't get there, then maybe that's okay too. But your whole day is just about that, being in nature and being with yourself. And I know that the Camino has like 3 different sections kind of to it when it comes to the human psyche. So I want you to speak to that.
Sure.
So do you camp each night and they set it up, or do you have to like hike with the tent, the sleeping bag?
Well, so I brought with me a guidebook that I took on the Camino. There's a couple different guidebooks that you can find, but the Camino de Santiago is broken up into stages. Each stage is a day's hike. To answer your specific question, you're basically hiking from village to village, and you're staying in hostels or or pensions. You're not necessarily camping in a tent, making your own food with a camp stove, things like that. So that's not a.
So your pack isn't as heavy as.
Not nearly as heavy. Okay. In fact, they suggest your pack weight's only like 10% of your body weight. Mine
I could totally do 15 miles without a heavy pack.
Yeah, mine was 22 pounds with water. So.
Oh, yeah, the water is what gets heavy, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to have water. So usually 2 to 3 liters. And there's fountains all along the way each day.
So I just want to back up for a minute because I know the process that you kind of went through preparing for this. So maybe before we get into the journey,
sure,
maybe talk a bit about the prep that you did to get ready to go on this quest.
Sure. Well, gear is a big part of the Camino. It starts with your backpack. You know, what are you going to carry all your things in? And then your clothing, accessories, things of that nature. So there's a lot of well-documented YouTube videos of people that have already walked the Camino, and they suggest what you should take and stuff. Interestingly enough, here in Portland, I went to REI and Next Adventure to outfit myself for the Camino. And 2 of the guys that work at Next Adventure have already done the Camino. And so they actually have a list at Next Adventure where you can go and pick up, and it shows all the things that they would recommend that you have in your backpack. And they had some great suggestions for me. I went in there looking for some rain gear. I didn't buy rain gear that day, but one of the tips they gave me was to carry a reflective umbrella. Now, I hiked from May to July. And you can get, like in Oregon, you can get some occasional rain showers, but it's also very hot. Mm-hmm. So they suggested carrying an umbrella that had a reflective top for the shade, like a parasol in Paris, right? Mm-hmm. To keep the sun off you, but would also double up for a rain umbrella. And I ended up carrying that. Very small, maybe 3 foot long, fit in the backpack, lightweight, and it was one of the best tips I ever received from the guys at Next Adventure. So that was pretty cool. So that was part of the prep for getting ready in terms of the gear. What's neat about this particular guidebook is it talks about the inner preparation. This is a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that you need to consider. Why are you doing the Camino? Why are you doing this walk? What do you want to accomplish? What are your goals? What are your outcomes? And sometimes you don't know.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's like, you know, I'm in transition. I need to go and kind of have time away alone. Now, I hike this solo, and the majority of people do walk the Camino by themselves.
Yeah.
Intentionally. Doesn't mean you're by yourself, but you're walking alone, right? So you have the freedom to make your own choices of where you stay, where you go, how far you go each day. You have everything that you need on your back. So you can make those choices each and every day.
Cool.
And that kind of total freedom, which is very difficult in our normal life, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I imagine. So talk a little bit about like what she was saying. What are the stages, the different stages in the spiritual side of this journey?
Yeah, they say the Camino is divided into 3 stages. The first one being very physical. You're walking 12 to 15 miles every day, day after day. That's quite a physical toll on the body. The only way to prepare for that, and I didn't do an adequate job of that, is to hike 12 to 15 miles a day in preparation for that. 2 to 3 miles a day, 5 days a week, not going to get you there. So I paid for that a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about pain on the Camino. So the first
right.
part is physical.
The mental part of working through the physical part.
The second part is mental. The second part of the Camino is kind of through an agricultural region of Spain. It's flat, it's dry, it's hot, it's kind of boring in terms of the landscape and the towns, etc. And then the last phase, again, we're talking about a 36-day venture here, or 30 days. So we got 10, 10, and 10. Now you're on day 20 to 30, becomes quite spiritual. And the reason it becomes spiritual is you're hiking a pilgrimage trail, a spiritual trail. You're going every single day through villages that have small churches, large cathedrals, Roman ruins, Roman castles, and it's a very historic and spiritual walk that people have been doing continuously for over 1,000 years.
Wow.
And trust me, after 20 to 25 days on the Camino, that starts to really add up, and there's a spiritual finish to that. Again, so this pilgrimage trail is called the Way, the Camino de Santiago, which is the way of St. James. St. James, the apostle of Christ, is buried in the church in Santiago. So you end up, after 36 days, in that cathedral at his tomb.
Oh, crazy.
So it's one of 3 Christian pilgrimages in the world. So,
wow.
Yeah.
What was it like going through some of the villages? Did you have any special moments in the villages that you?
Yeah, I mean, the villages were great. I mean, day one is in a French town in the Pyrenees Mountains, about a half a day's hike from the French-Spanish border. So Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port is this jumping off point for the French way, the Camino Frances, which is the most popular of the Camino routes. There's quite a few Camino routes. So you go into this ancient village. It's been there for 1,000 years, provisioning pilgrims to start on this great journey. So I got there via train from Bayonne, France, and I showed up in the town. I did not know where I was going to stay. I just showed up, went to lunch, met some people. They told me, hey, there's a hostel right across the street from the pilgrim office called Bellari. You should consider staying there. So everything closes down in Spain during the middle of the afternoon. So when things opened up again, I went up to Bellari. I walked in. Somebody had canceled. There were only 20 beds. There was one left. I got in. And the entire Camino was kind of that way. I never once made a reservation to stay. I just hiked and showed up. And not every day you could, at the place I showed up at, you had a bed, but I always found a bed every night.
Wow.
So there's sort of spontaneity about the Camino. Yeah.
Was this your first time that you had taken that many days of not working at your JOB ever?
It was. Yeah, up to this point, like 1 to 2 weeks total.
Trip. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's the universe.
Well, interestingly enough, at day 3 and day 14 on the Camino, I had these experiences where I felt like it was supposed to be over. And those coincide with a long weekend and a 2-week break. Like I had this really overwhelming sensation that the thing was over. Like I was supposed to leave the Camino.
Like a little panicky feeling.
Well, just like
I need to get back to work.
It's a pattern. We have these habitual patterns. We go through life over and over doing the same things over and over and over again. And our body becomes the mind, and our body just thinks that's what we're supposed to do because that's what we've been trained to do. And so when you start breaking the habit of being your old self, like Joe Dispenza, our friend, talks about, and you start doing something completely different, you start overcoming those patterns. And that happened for me on the Camino. But at day 14 was a big over the top for me.
What was day 14?
It coincided with 2 weeks of vacation. So I had,
got you. Okay.
Right? So the old me is like, oh, hey, you're supposed to go back to work. Okay, you're supposed to go back to the old pattern. Whoa, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Go home, Rickman.
Go home, Rickman. Get on a plane, go back to work.
Get your ass back to work. So. What are you thinking?
So those are the stages, the physical, the mental, and then eventually the spiritual.
So talk a little bit about just like that first week of doing something like that. I mean, you've never done anything like this. You're backpacking Europe. You're in this transition. So I know that with like food and diets, like say if you do raw for 30 days, about day 7, between like 4 and 7 days, you start detoxing, all of the stuff. Do you go through something similar?
Yeah. So there I am in Saint Jean, this old medieval village with cobblestone streets, very narrow streets, all of these people from all over the world have gathered there to start their Camino. I mean, the excitement is palpable.
Wow.
And you're sitting at, dinner at the hostel, meeting 20 new people that you've never met before. We're going around the table, introducing ourselves and talking about why we're doing the Camino, what brought us here. And so, day after day after day, this experience of meeting new people and learning about the Camino happens over and over again. The first day is probably physically the most challenging. It's 4,500 vertical feet straight up the Pyrenees Mountains,
Wow.
and then down the other side, 3,000 feet to a small town in France called Roncesvalles. Even though that's a really physically challenging day, it's your first day, so you're strong. You're not tired.
Up.
It's the first day you've done that.
Pure blisters.
So after you start doing that 2 and 3 and 4 days, on the 5th or 6th day, I started having tendonitis in my right ankle, above my right ankle actually, and I started getting physically fatigued from the Camino.
And questioning.
And I'm
whether
like,
you should
what am I?
stop.
Yeah, I didn't know. In fact, Lori's a physical therapist, so I reached out to Lori and I sent her a picture of my leg, and I'm like, what's going on here? I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, right? We diagnosed this as tendonitis, and so taking it easy, slowing down, maybe taking a few days off the Camino, icing it down, and doing some different strategies, pain medication, ibuprofen, I think was one of the...
Yeah.
So I ended up not stopping, but I did slow my pace down. But what's interesting, this was the first lesson of the Camino for me. When you have pain in your life, if you don't deal with it right then, it numbs the experience of life. So when I'm walking along the Camino and I'm in this wonderful, unique place and space for 3 or 4 or 5 days, all of a sudden now I can't concentrate on anything but my pain, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. And so if you don't stop and deal with your pain, it ruins your experience of life.
Yeah.
And sometimes we go on chronically for months or years, and we miss out on life because we haven't dealt with pain.
So I have a question. I know you chatted with a lot of different people along the way. Do you think that this physical pain that you went through, do most people go through some sort of physical adjustment to this new lifestyle? And 2, do you think that maybe, just maybe, that is part of the whole experience, is that you have to push through that pain to get to the end point?
Yes, everybody goes through the pain of the Camino. And in fact, it never really ends. I mean, it goes from tendonitis to blisters. I didn't get blisters till day 16, as it turns out. But there's the pain of sleeping in an interesting place. Not every night. I ended up in a place that had a bed. I mean, there were nights I slept in the back of a church on a mat. Interestingly enough, that particular night was the most uncomfortable sleeping night, but one of the most memorable experiences I had on the Camino. But everybody deals with pain. Everybody. Some people never finish the Camino because of it. One of the ladies I met in St. Jean on night number 1, she was from Holland, from the Netherlands. She ended up having to leave the Camino on day 5. She could not finish because of her pain. She had some leg issues. So there's this gratefulness and this gratitude, and you don't know when you're walking the Camino if you're going to finish. People always say, hey, when are you going to finish the Camino? Well, my plan is approximately here, but, God willing, or whatever willing, right? I mean, you don't know.
Right, well.
Until you get there that you're going to finish, because it's a physically demanding process. You never do. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's neat.
We've had many of those conversations, but that's part of the reason that you went on this journey, correct? Was some of your own mental, spiritual discomfort at that point in time, and who am I, where am I going, what do I want to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in life transition. I'm 58 years old. I'm in physically the best shape of my life. And I thought, okay, well, I've never been to Europe, and I I wanted to do the Camino, as I mentioned at the top of the show. I also wanted to travel Europe. I wanted to see Germany and Italy and Switzerland and Paris and all these places. And I thought, well, I can always do that, but I might not always be able to walk the Camino de Santiago. And so I had this draw to do that. And it turned out to be absolutely 100% the right choice. In fact, I'll probably walk the Camino again.
Awesome.
And probably within the next year. Like I really miss it, and everybody that I met along the way misses it as well. It's interesting.
Well, that becomes a part of you.
So the first night at the Bellari, when I met all these people, and people are talking about where they're from and everything else, 3 of the people in that group of 20 had walked the Camino 7 times.
Wow.
One of the gals, she was 72 years old. Had not only walked the Camino 7 times, she'd walked the PCT twice and the ACT once.
Wow.
So give those acronyms for people who don't know what they are.
So the PCT is a Pacific Crest Trail, which is a trail in western U.S. from Mexico to Canada. It's a wilderness trail.
Like in the movie Wild.
Like in the movie Wild. It's a wilderness trail. And the Camino's not like that in the sense that you're going from village to village. You're not backpacking. The AT is the Appalachian Trail. A little bit shorter, but still a very serious backpacking trek. But these are long, long treks. And
wow, 72.
Yeah. Now, she got hurt along the way, so she couldn't finish. But she was there with her granddaughters, introducing them, and they were young, and they were teenagers, and they were walking the Camino with the granddaughters to introduce them to the Camino. So that was kind of cool.
Very cool.
So by week 2, you're kind of feeling much better after the tendonitis, or is that something that really never went away?
No, it did. After about day 6 or 7, it started acting up. I started slowing down. I nursed through it. Talked to Lori, my daughter Sierra as well. She's a nurse as well, and we kind of figured out how to manage that pain and deal with that, and then eventually I got over that and pushed on through. Yeah.
Were some of those magical moments when you're by yourself did you get moments like that where there's no people around?
Quite a few, actually. So I hiked for 36 days, and of the 36 days, 30 of those days I hiked alone.
Oh, cool.
I only hiked with other people 6 days, and it wasn't until like the 13th day of me walking on the Camino that I actually walked with somebody.
Oh, wow.
So there's a process there where some people hike with other people, and I just needed to be alone. I needed to kind of figure things out, and it took me a while to kind of get to that point. You also have a respect for other people that are walking alone, so you don't want to, start walking or talking with somebody else if they want to be alone. And here's the interesting thing I learned. When you start walking and talking with somebody, and you're present with that person, you're focused on them. You're very present with them, and you're listening to them and their story, and you're genuinely connected to them. And I walked for the first day 13, with Anna the entire time. And what happens is you start focusing on them, and you lose the experience of the Camino, which is kind of an interesting, but she was there to teach me something. So you don't want to not be mindful of those connections, but at the same time, it takes away from the experience of the Camino, which is more nature driven. And
right.
So it's a balance.
Right.
And I found myself drawn between not wanting to be with other people so I could experience the Camino, and yet mindful of who was coming across my path to teach me something and learn from them. So.
What kind of critters did you see along the way?
What's that?
What kind of critters did you see along the way?
All kinds. This is the interesting thing too. So life slows down when you walk. The world slows. Ants, bees, birds, snails, butterflies.
I knew you were going to say butterflies.
I mean, it's amazing. And then, of course, there's a lot of animals, sheep, cows,
no bears
horses,
or cougars,
no
or
bears
wolves.
or cougars, but because it's an agricultural ranching style.
Okay.
Spain's a lot like Oregon in that regard. It'd be like hiking
Well, I've seen bear in Oregon.
Yes, you have. Never saw any of those animals, but life really slows to a crawl.
Yeah. Well, it's that slow your pace down, stop to smell the roses.
Yeah.
I can actually relate to that experience. I had a psychedelic experience many years ago after leaving the Jehovah's Witness religion. And so I was accepting death for the first time in my life. And it was also the first time I went through a divorce. I was a mom. Same thing. So I was really taking a journey, and it was due to a mushroom trip that I had. And it just kind of, I remember everything kind of connecting and clicking. But the next morning when I woke up, I was in my friend's bathroom on the toilet, and I opened up this book that was on there, and I opened it up, and it was just talking about slowing down and it may not appear to be a rose, but take the time to stop and enjoy it. And it was, and in my head, I was like, this would be a homeless person that's sitting there. You just never know what kind of gift or whatever is going to happen. And I physically slowed my pace down after making that realization. And I've never forgotten that. Like, cause it's like, once you have that information and you start to slow it down, you notice so many more things. You notice people. People think I'm an empath, but it's just because I'm watching, listening, being mindful of the moment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I can relate to that. Absolutely.
We live in a very busy...
Too busy in my opinion.
I would say even a chaotic place, especially for us urban dwellers.
In the U.S.
In the U.S.
In the U.S., definitely.
And on the Camino... You know, you're walking, number one, you're not in a car. I mean, I wasn't in a car for 7 weeks. Your phone, you only have Wi-Fi at night unless you have a data plan. I chose to be off-grid. And so you really just connect to the place and space and the people around you.
Yeah.
Sounds, textures, light, vibrate, all those things really your senses really become heightened because that's how you connect to the world. And what's interesting is once you see all that and you experience that, you don't want to go back to the other. So I'm really struggling with re-engaging in my old life.
Going to Burning Man, I can relate to that because when you go to Burning Man, they give you the survival guide. It's only a week though. They treat it, there's a temple, you go for a reason, and whether you're having a good time or a bad time, it's going to change your life. But what happens is afterwards, it's like they have support groups for that, because afterwards you're like, I've seen it work. I've seen community work on this level, and it's beautiful. It's amazing. There were thousands of people. I don't understand why we can't do this every day. Why can't our society be more like this, where we're gifting and helping each other out, and there's like no exchange of money. And so you go through this shock. You're like, what do you mean I can't wear my underwear today? Like,
so you know what I think about that?
To be you.
So at Burning Man, and I've never been, but
you should come with us this year for her 50th.
Is this the last time they're doing it too?
I don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah.
So we have Burning Man and we have the Camino, and there's other things like this. So what happens is there's a lot of like-minded people in that place and space.
Yes.
And so I'm walking the Camino with a lot of other pilgrims from all over the world that are doing the same thing. And they're like-minded, and that's what's really cool. Here in Portland, I am completely disconnected from like-minded people, with the exception of yourself. And we don't connect that often, right? As individuals. That's the difference.
Right.
If we were all like-minded, it would be a lot easier to change the world.
Well, I think there are some people, and let's go back to Dr. Joe Dispenza, because he has created a community online. There's a community online, and he's also got his students that go to his retreats that have even more access to him. And I'm sure there are others. There's Greg Braden, and there are others out there. There are other communities out there of like-minded people. And Dispenza's community is global at this point, but how do we as individuals connect with those people in our lives right now in the cities that we live so that we can affect change? And not only change in our communities, but continue our own personal growth and our own personal change. How do we do that?
I think that we exist in a society right now where we're all barely hanging on. I think that we're all very close to being bankrupt with no money. And I think that we're so caught up in surviving and just making sure we have a roof over our head and food in our family's belly. And I just feel like everybody is surviving right now instead of thriving. And I honestly think personally that when you can find a really good, now, and I don't mean like a lazy hippie commune. I'm talking where you find like-minded individuals who are smart, driven, want to travel the world, want to have a self-sustained property, farm to table, like share this with people. And I think that, because I think about it, because I have a lot of friends that are, including my husband, that work on the genius level, like engineers. Everybody does something absolutely incredible. And I'm like, oh my God, could you imagine what would happen if we all came together and did something? We could make it work and we could sustain our lives. We could have a home base where it would be always taken care of when we're off traveling the world. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
It's like, I feel like you were kind of talking, and we should go into this a little bit. You were talking about earlier when you came over about how do we, wake up with this reality. Like for me, it was like my first day in Europe on Lake Como. How do we make that happen all the time?
All the time, every day.
And I just, in my head, I feel like we can make that work, but we've got to come together to make that work. I think that life would be so much more beautiful if we could make that work.
And I think that's part of our goal is to get people talking and to make those connections. And I think that's part of maybe what some of the spirituality or the message from this podcast to others is how do we make those connections? And not only how do we sustain our own existence on this planet, but how do we help each other grow and continue to reach and grow? Because I think so many people are stagnant in their lives. They wake up to the Groundhog Day, as we've talked about several times, to the same pressures, the same people, the same obligations, and it becomes so overwhelming that all you can do is get through that day, to go to sleep, to wake up to the same fucking shit the next day. How do we break this cycle?
So I am convinced that there are places in the world that are more connected than others. And
agreed.
Okay, so if you're looking for a group of like-minded people or like-minded communities or whatever, it may not be where you're at. And I have never felt more disconnected from a city that I've spent 20 years living in and building than Portland, Oregon. It doesn't do it for me. I've been to a lot of different places, and this place is not resonating with me, and maybe that's me. It's just, I can't find my place here. I can't. Yeah. I don't know if that's just me or what, but this particular place that we're in, this island that we live on, Hayden Island, is a very, very interesting place.
It is
magical.
It is a magical place, but it is an oasis inside of a desert of a city.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just me.
I do talk about how it's kind of the best of all worlds in this one spot in Portland.
It's pretty cool. But, there's probably a lot of other cool places. I mean, Portland's a really cool place.
Yeah, but we get the mountain, the sandy beach, the water. We're surrounded by water. Nobody wants to come over here because you have to go up the I-5 to get here.
Yeah.
I was just going to say it's an oasis, but also it can be a cave.
Secluded. You can seclude yourself.
And
easily.
Rickman and I talked about this just the other night, how this is a very wonderful place to be if you're in transition or if you're
Healing.
Oh, I could definitely say healing.
Looking for your new spiritual path, because it's a beautiful, visually beautiful place to be, and two, there are phenomenal fucking people who live here on the island.
Family over here is
remember, the whole world is in vibration. And what are we on? We're on an island in the middle of the river that is constantly flowing.
Yeah.
We have wind, we have waves, we have water.
Beavers.
The reason this place is special is because it vibrates on a frequency that everybody connects with. And when you get onto this island, you can feel that immediately.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of other cool neighborhoods in Portland that have that as well. And there's a lot of like-minded people. But you really got to hunt for them. You really do. Forest Park is another one. That place is a gem.
I love Forest Park.
Forest Park is a gem. Northwest Portland.
Mm-hmm. That's what I say too.
There's places in the city, and you know what I'm talking about, right?
I know exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Portland's a pretty cool place in that regard. I mean, it's like San Francisco, these little pockets, these little neighborhoods that have these little energies, and like Haight-Ashbury.
Yeah.
If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
San Francisco. And Portland has those little spots, but it's hard to find. So what I've experienced in other places in the U.S. and abroad is that there's energy centers that are much. Barcelona, you talked about Barcelona, some other places. Maybe we need to go to these places to be more connected and more whole. I don't know.
Well, my mother-in-law lives in Como, Italy, so we're going to be going over there a lot more. We do have quite a few friends over there. We resonate with Europe so much. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to talk about Africa just for a little minute here too, because one of the things when I was living over there, a lot of the Africans wanted a visa or help getting a visa over to America. And I asked them, why? And well, it's the land of plenty. It's the this, it's the that. But I looked at them and they live in such a communal environment. Everybody depends on everybody. All of the mothers raise all of the children. Yeah. They eat around a common pot. They communicate with each other. They actually cannot live without each other. And here in America, we can very easily live independently without even talking to another human being, because guess what? We can communicate through email and our phones. We don't even need to have conversations with other people if you want to go to the extreme.
I'm ready for community. I'm in.
I think everybody is. I think that's where
we're
headed again.
Yeah.
I love to cook. I'm going to actually, Rickman, we are going to do a winter indoor garden in my room in here, and I'm going to set up my patio table from outside in there, and I'm going to turn the bright light off at dinner time, but we're going to start having dinners in the garden inside with all the twinkly LED color lights and stuff, with the live plants around us.
With fresh grown produce.
With fresh grown produce and herbs and stuff through the winter with this light, and we're going to see what happens this winter to see if it can't kind of get us a little bit out of that hibernation mode that I know that I do in the wintertime, because it's just like,
I'm
you just get through the day.
Now, right?
It's like rainy, it's cloudy. Today was such an Eeyore blustery kind of a day.
I had the same experience.
Everybody's energy today was so heavy, so heavy. And so we're going to see if we can make a difference throughout this next season. So you are more than welcome to come and join us in our little happy place and see if it helps a little bit. But those are the first steps into making a community, is by having each other's back, relying on each other for certain things,
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about the physical. We've talked a little bit about the mental. I want to head into the spiritual part of the journey now.
Yeah, I definitely do.
Okay, so
too.
before we get to spiritual, you have to go through mental, and we haven't talked about that.
Okay, let's go through a little more of the mental.
After 2 weeks on the Camino, Stunning scenery, the mountains, the streams, the villages, Pamplona, Logrono. You get into this long 2-week stretch. It's called the Meseta, which is the plains of Spain. Very similar to Eastern Oregon, right? You can imagine what Eastern Oregon looks like.
Flat,
Kansas.
Dry, hot, agricultural, So they have they beautiful vineyards, Rioja wine, wheat, all kinds of different things. But it's a very boring walk, and it goes on for 2 weeks. You'll walk, so you're walking 12 miles today, straight line as far as you can see.
It's like the I-5.
And it's like 90 degrees, and you're like, okay, so it becomes this mental, like, it's a boring landscape. You've lost all of the birds and the bees and the snails, and now it's just the wind and you. And so there's this mental part that you're trying to push through, and you're thinking, what was I thinking? 500 miles? Really? This is it? But at the end of that, when you come through that and you finally get through that, you're ready for the next stage, which is the spiritual phase.
So I have a question. Which stage on your Instagram, because you posted a lot on your Instagram, and I remember one video that you posted, and it was just the sound of your footsteps on the gravel.
Right. Yeah.
Was that your mental moment?
Well, actually, I did that a couple of times, but yeah, it was more in the middle part. So your walking becomes rhythmic, right? And the sound of your feet and your trekking poles hitting the ground becomes very rhythmic. Again, back to vibration and sounds. And it's something that you become very, very accustomed to, and you really, really enjoy that. So it was in both stages, but yeah, a lot in the Meseta, in the middle stages.
Do you think when you're walking at a stage like that where it's super boring, does your head go to different places?
It does, yeah.
Like where? I'm going to dig a little bit.
Like you start doubting, why did I do this? What was I thinking, And this is a dumb idea.
And this is after the 2 weeks?
This is after, week 3 to 4, right?
Yeah,
now
you're like, okay, now I really got to get back to work.
Yeah, you're fatigued. You're walking, you're fatigued, you're tired, you're
by
bored
yourself.
mentally, right? And then it's just you. It's just you and 12 miles of straight road.
Nature, you and nature.
And, and now what's interesting, this is the time where hiking with another person makes a lot of sense, because now you're focused on the person and you're learning, and you're less focused on the boredom of the trail. So the Meseta really became a place where connecting with other people made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being able to stay present, stay focused, stay grateful for all of those things, grateful for the sound of your footsteps, grateful for the heat, grateful for, because it rained twice in my 30-something days that I was on the trail. And those are miserable days. So being grateful for the heat, right? Instead of cussing the heat, being grateful for the heat. So there's a lot of things to be grateful for. So it tests all of your resolve.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think that when you can overcome those moments, though, that it feels so amazing. It's like you did it. You kept one foot in front of the other.
Well, and again, every 4 to 7 miles, you're coming into a small village. And there might be a small little cathedral or church, a merte, they call them in Spanish, or even a big cathedral in the bigger cities. And then you walk into a place like that after having just walked through the desert, if you will.
Right.
And you're seeing relics. You're seeing an altar with gold, a statue of Mary, a statue of Santiago. You're smelling the incense. You're inside this church that's cool from being the heat and the wind of outside. And you're inside with this backpack on, and you're just humbled immediately. And then you feel this intense spiritual energy, and you're just at times weeping.
Yeah.
Like overcome with emotion from being in the desert to in the cathedral. And this happens like 3 or 4 times a day sometimes,
so
depending on your journey.
Sure.
Yeah. And you never know. I mean, you've got a little guidebook, but you don't know what's going to happen or who you're going to meet or where you're going to end up or what's going to be on the menu today. And that's another thing. Food and water. You show up, they're closed. Or, they're open, but, there's 3 or 4 people in line and they just ran out of sausage or whatever it is. And so, I mean, you're grateful for the smallest of things.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing.
Keeps you very humble.
So I was just going to ask, you're talking about being grateful for some of the smallest of things, but what about some of those meals that you had with other pilgrims where you're drinking the wine and you're sharing your stories in different languages? I mean, what was that like? So
I mentioned earlier about sleeping on a mat.
Uh-huh.
There's a town called Grenon, and I forget, it was probably like week 3. And I showed up in this small village, and the hostel was full, so I ended up going into a church. They're called hospitales, and these are a lot of the cathedrals and churches would put pilgrims up for the night stay. This is where people stayed before hostels really became, mainstream. So I check into this hostel and it's donation only. So it's called donativo in Spanish, but you donate 5 to 10 euros for your mat. And they've got these mats all over the floor. And I don't know, maybe 60, 70 people are going to stay in. So I ended up getting my cot and everything and put my backpack down and go into town and have a drink. Usually it was red wine and cheese and stuff. Came back and they were doing a communal dinner that was going to start around 8:00 at night. And it was spaghetti and Caesar salad and some bread. And there were 60 people sitting around. We started eating around 8. But before we ate, 3 different people got up in 3 different languages and talked about what they were grateful for and did a little pilgrim's prayer. And then we all broke bread and, talked and had fun and everything. After dinner was over, they invited us to a special service, if you will, for anybody that wanted to go explore the cathedral. Actually, it was a little church. So only about 25 of the 70 people participated in this. And we end up walking, this is about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. We'll walk up this circular stone staircase. It's cold, it's dark, and you're walking up maybe 2 flights of stairs, and you come through this wooden door with an arch into a candlelit room. It's at the back of the church on the 2nd level, and the church is pitch black. You can't see what's going on. We find out later that where we're at in this church. And these small little candles, there's one at every single chair, and there are these large choir chairs where, as it turns out, the choir sits on their Sunday services to sing. They're at the back of the church. So we sit in this place, and that's leading the vigil, if you will, has a large candle.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, we're all here walking the Camino de Santiago, and tonight we're going to pass the large candle around to each person. And as you receive the candle, we'd like to have you explain why you're on the Camino, what's been special about the Camino for you in your own language, and then pass the candle to the next person. And so for the next 45 minutes, we pass the candle around and listen to people explain their Camino journey, what it meant to them, what was important to them in their language. In some languages we couldn't understand. And so after this 45-minute experience took place and the last candle was passed, someone flipped on the lights in the church and it lit up the altar. And the altar was all gold, and it was probably 60 feet tall. And we're at the back of the church looking forward, and all we could see was the lights on the altar. And one of the ladies that was in the back with us started singing a song.
I knew that was coming.
I've got
A cappella. And her voice is reverberating through this medieval church off the stone walls. And of course, this is quite the experience. We're still candlelit in the back. And so this goes on for maybe 5 or 6 minutes. She finishes a song and everybody gets up, hugs each other, and we go back downstairs. This is a completely unexpected experience. I go downstairs to go to sleep. There's no sleeping bag because most places have blankets and sheets, but I'm on a mat. And you don't carry a sleeping bag on the Camino de Santiago. You carry a sleeping bag liner. So I end up sleeping in my clothes, and it's cold. I mean, we're inside, but we're really outside. It was the worst night's sleep on the Camino, but it was one of the most memorable experiences I had. The woman that sang the song in Granón, I had heard 2 days earlier in a cathedral in Viana. And I'm walking through the cathedral and I'm videotaping, and she starts singing Amazing Grace. Now I'm up at the altar. I can't see who this person is. And I'm videotaping, and I videotape, and she's still singing this song. And I realize when I'm in Granón listening to her sing, that's the woman I heard. Her name is Tiana. I met her later, much later in the Camino, and we ended up hanging out after I went through Santiago on the last couple of days of our trip. And interestingly enough, this girl was going through a relationship issue with her boyfriend, and so she had a lot of negative energy around her, and at the time I met her, I was kind of put off by her. But she was one of the most memorable people on the entire Camino. And so there's this dichotomy of people that irritate you, but yet lift you up, all in the same experience.
Yeah.
Sense.
It's neat.
So,
that's neat.
It was. And there's all kinds of connectivity like that happens. And so how can someone that irritated you the most in the Camino also be the most memorable experience that you had?
Because it taught you a lesson, right?
Yes, another teacher.
Because it taught you a lesson. I get those lessons. I get reminders of those types of lessons constantly. Definitely.
So be careful to pass judgment early.
Well, that's the thing is that you just never know unless you ask the question. I know that I've talked about that before in previous podcasts. So
how about let's
talk about it all the time in Lift and Uber.
Not pass judgment.
Well, because I think sometimes naturally we do. And it's not even like we're sitting there like pointing the finger going, about something. It's more of that cautionary thing that comes up too. It's like, am I going to be safe in this moment because this person is approaching me in this certain way? And I may not like how this person's approaching me, but then later you find out that that's just their personality and how they're approaching you, and that you were just reflecting all your fears, right?
Right.
I think that we have moments like that.
Well, we're human, but my point is why don't we just pause for a minute and think about that limiting fear or belief, and not judge the book by its cover. Because like we had the other night, I would have never had the conversation with Bruce, the Air Force vet / musician / played with Blue Man Group, had I judged that book by the cover. Oh yeah, no, I said, I think that it's like we have moments like that where we're reminded of that. It's like, wow, you just never know until you ask. So when that happened to you, that moment, where were you in the trip?
I was like in the beginning third.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, it was a real challenge from a sleep standpoint. Earlier that day, so after I checked in, I went back into this small village, and there was a small little bar, and I found the first guitar that I had found on the Camino, and I was able to play this guitar while music played over the intercom. A lot of people were outside because it was still sunny and stuff, and I ended up playing guitar for a few patrons inside the the pub and stuff. So for me, it was a wonderful day. Wonderful day for me playing music. It was a wonderful day to be a part of this experience, sharing my thought, the candlelight, listening to Tiziana sing. But again, at night, I was miserable all night long.
Right.
And cold, and got up the next morning and there was nothing to eat for breakfast because everything was closed. And so, again, you just learn to appreciate, wow, this great experience in the afternoon, this great dinner, this great candlelight vigil, a really rough night, no breakfast the next morning. And so it all happens at the
Balance.
same time. Yeah. And so when great things happen, you're grateful. And when things don't go your way, you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
What's the lesson?
What's the lesson? What's the lesson?
What's the lesson?
I think that kind of pins it right there is what's the lesson?
Well, the lesson is that your greatest moments and your worst moments can happen kind of all at the same time.
Yeah. And I think that
And they're fleeting
in
like
order
the
to
breath.
know about the light, you have to understand the dark. So
Yeah.
True story.
And everything is impermanent.
I think that had I not had all of my dark, horrible, traumatizing moments in my life, I would not be who I am today.
Had I not had my challenges, especially with my heart, I would not be who I am today.
Yeah.
For damn sure, because those things made me do a deep introspective dive. And I know for you, or I believe for you, that walking the Camino was a deep introspective dive for you, the whole journey.
Yeah.
So the spiritual side.
The spiritual side.
Let's
so now
go
we're
there.
through the Meseta. And as you come into Western Spain, it's like Western Oregon. You start getting back into the mountains. It's green. The weather is very marine-like. You know how we get the weather coming off the Pacific Ocean here in Spain. The weather's coming off the Atlantic Ocean. So it's very, very similar. It's interesting to me how similar Spain is to Oregon in terms of weather and geography. And so you've gone through these beautiful cities, Pamplona, Leon, Burgos. These cathedrals are massive and they're
This is
beautiful.
northern Spain? Is this northern
Spain?
Okay.
Yeah. Santiago is just slightly north of Portugal. In Western Spain. And so it's just about every single day there's a small church or a cathedral that you're passing through. And if you want to stop, you can go in. Some of them are open, some of them aren't. But you find yourself being drawn to these places. The other thing that's interesting about the Spanish towns is on the way out of town, in just about every single village, there's a cemetery. And at first, it was like, okay, what does that mean? You're passing through these cemeteries, and I thought about our death, how short life is, and so how much you need to embrace your time on earth. Later on, it became, that's the death of my old self, for me. And every single, I don't know, there's just these visual reminders. I had lost my brother and a father the year before in 2017. So I was constantly reminded how short life is, and another friend that died of cancer that was 58. So that was another reason I wanted to hike the Camino.
Yeah.
While I could,
Yeah.
And I felt really grateful to do that.
I understand that.
So that's part of the spiritual thing, Lori, to your question, is you're going through these cathedrals, you're going by these cemeteries, and you're meeting people, and you have this connectivity between people that you've met and what has been said or who knew who, and you meet somebody and you lose track of them for 3 or 4 days, and all of a sudden they cross your path again. So there's this patterns that you start noticing that you never noticed before because you're way more aware and you're no longer distracted with work, phones, television, radio, your mom, your brother, your mother, your sister, your husband, whatever, right? There's all these distractions in life. And when those distractions go away, you start noticing more.
Right.
And you start noticing more. And if you're in these spiritual places, you start noticing more of those things as well. So
spiritual places like physically or internal?
Both. Yeah.
And the combination thereof, even more magical, right?
Yeah. And I was meditating every day with a daily calm and spending a lot of time contemplating and being quiet and thinking and reflecting on things. So there was a spiritual aspect to that too.
It's like a day in the life of Naomi. My wheels are constantly spinning. I have a lot of time to think. I notice a lot of things because that's how I entertain myself in the day. I just think about all these different people's lives, and I see people almost die every day on the road, or I'll just be in the forest. But I just think about a lot of things. It's awesome.
Well, one of the things I'm trying to practice right now is not thinking. Not thinking and just being and trusting that something bigger than me knows my plan and my purpose and is guiding me, directing me, and giving me the resources that I need to get there.
Mm.
As long as you're willing to put the work in, because you just can't sit on the couch.
You have to take action on the impulses or the messages or the lessons, but you have to be still to get the lessons. I believe you have to be very still to receive the lessons or the messages that you need to act on. You're absolutely right. So how did your Camino end?
So as I got closer and closer to Santiago, it was interesting. I was never really in a hurry to get there. And one of the pieces of advice I would give to anybody that wants to walk the Camino de Santiago is do not worry about how long it takes to get there. In other words, there were so many people I met on the Camino that had to get there by a certain day to take a flight back to home. Those people missed out on the experience because they were time pressured. Most of our stress and anxiety comes from the pressure of time every single day.
You're right.
Agreed.
When you lose time pressure, your life will change. And my life has changed back to the old self because of the time pressure that's come. Some of that is self-imposed. Most of it's imposed by other people. If you have a job, somebody else sets a meeting for you, or somebody else says you have to go here, or your customer calls and says this is a problem. And so these are all external things that put pressure on you to react and do. When you don't have time pressure and you don't have to be anywhere at any particular time, you're free to live your life in kind of a free way. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, magic happens.
Yeah.
And so I got into Santiago on July 4th. Interesting day to arrive Santiago, unplanned, my personal Independence Day. And it just turned out that way.
That's awesome.
I had a nice meal kind of before I got into the main square, went to the large square where the cathedral is, took a couple pictures. And then everyone goes to the pilgrim's office to get their Compostela, which is their certificate of completion.
Oh, he brought it with him.
And I did bring it.
Yay.
As you walk the Camino de Santiago, when you get to the pilgrimage office at the beginning, they give you a credential, which is a small passport. And as you walk the Camino, you collect stamps along the way to show that you are, in fact, a pilgrim walking the Camino. And a lot of the hostels are specifically for pilgrims. If you don't have a credential and a passport, you can't stay there. So they keep these places and spaces for pilgrims. So you take your credential into the office and you present that, and they give you a certificate of completion, which is a Compostela.
That's awesome.
And so after I got that, I went to a church, and they do pilgrim masses every day for the pilgrims arriving Santiago. Imagine this. every day, day after day after day, all year long, pilgrims are arriving in Santiago that have finished the Camino. Some of them have only walked for 5 or 6 days, the last 100 kilometers or 60 miles, and can still get the completion certificate. Others have walked 500 miles like me. Others have walked 2,000. They'll start in Eastern Europe and walk through. So you get all these people, and imagine the experience when you get there after all these days and you finally accomplish something. All these people are hugging and, enjoying the moment. And I went to this church, and there were a group of Spanish girls there receiving pilgrims, and they were there volunteering. And they spent like 2 weeks. They were going to do their own Camino, but they were going to spend 2 weeks greeting pilgrims and then go on their Camino. And I met a couple of these young gals. They were college-age girls. Walked me through the whole church, explained the inside and outside of the church, and invited me back to the Mass that occurred at 10 o'clock at night. So I came back to the Mass, and of course the Mass is in Spanish. And I'm sitting off to the side, and I look over during the middle of the Mass, and I see Tomas, who was from Monterrey, Mexico. I'd met him on the Camino maybe 2 weeks earlier, and he said, hey, when we get to Santiago, maybe we could connect. But we hadn't connected yet, and he turns out at the church where I'm at this Mass.
Awesome.
So I say hi, I nod to him, and the Mass continues on. It's about a 1-hour Mass, and about halfway through the Mass, and I'm not a Catholic, but if you've been to Catholic Mass, they have these readings. Thomas gets up out of the pew and walks up to the altar and does the second reading. And I'm there, and I take pictures of Thomas doing the reading. Well, that's why I was there. It was to witness that moment for him, to share that back with him. After Mass, we connected up again. We had dinner together. He was like 22, 23 years old.
But, it's like my son's age.
These are the kinds of connections and the kind of experiences that you have on the Camino. And so that's the spiritual part of it, right? You go to this place, not expecting to, and then someone greets you, meets you, explains what's going on, prays for you. The next day, I met the gals saw me in the square sitting. I was journaling, and they came over and talked to me. I had picked up a prayer out of one of the altars, and they explained what the prayer meant in Spanish to me, and it was just spiritual.
Yeah.
So,
bravo for those moments.
Yeah.
So, would you say that it changed your life?
It has.
Forever?
It has.
Well done.
Because now I've seen what life can be like, right? I never experienced those kinds of things. The slowness, dealing with pain, the interconnectivity of everyone, the beauty, and then the accomplishment, right? When you can accomplish something like that, you feel pretty confident in yourself, and that you can accomplish other things. But I just want more of that.
I'm in.
I want more of that.
I'm in.
So.
I agree. I think that could probably really be the lesson of this podcast, is that we can all strive to get to those places more often, because some of us do have to do our JOBs still. But it is really important to take that yearly vacation, that 2-day coast trip. Because, you went to the coast recently, and then my husband and I went to the coast this last week with our dog, had a really good time just to get away sometimes. It is really important to recharge in those ways.
I agree, but I also believe that there are things that we can do daily to keep us in a more balanced spiritual identity, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that can be, for me, you all know, meditation is a huge part of my life. But after I try to meditate in the morning, and after that, I walk my dog. So I go from meditation to nature. And I just don't see how it gets any better to start your everyday day with some sort of practice or ritual, and that's not for everybody.
And that's not making your lunch
Right.
and making your coffee and putting your
Right.
clothes on. It's like
Right.
taking time to hang out with yourself before you start your day.
It's giving yourself that time to fill your cup, because I've said it before, if you do not keep your cup full, you have nothing to give to anybody or anything that you're dealing with for that day. We have to fill our own cups. We have to keep our cups full.
Well, the old retirement model is, you work your whole life and you save your money, and then you retire and you go live the life that you always wanted to live. That's a broken model. It is a broken model. And I think what a lot of young people are doing, even people our age are doing, is they're taking time now while they can. And if you haven't taken a sabbatical from your life, I would highly recommend doing it. 2 weeks is not enough. 4 weeks is not enough. 6 weeks is a long time. But whatever that journey is, take it.
Yeah.
And if you can do it, with your significant other or by yourself, I would really encourage the listeners to go out and do that, because it really gives you an opportunity to step away from the old patterns. And it takes time. It takes time to kind of unwind that and really, really get into the moment in a new way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had one little moment with my dog where we were in California, living in kind of between Ventura and Ojai. And I took Felia, my pit bull, and she had her little backpack. And we went hiking out into, I think it's like Los Padres National Park. And it could potentially be kind of, I'm sure it would be on that one trail that goes along the whole West Coast. Anyway, so we did 2 days. We hiked all day. And this is the first time I had a really horrible backpack. So it hurt my arms. I carried the water. And of course, I carried Felia's water too, because I felt bad, which was really stupid. I made her carry her own food. But her and I hiked with our sleeping bag and our food and our water. And we hiked until it was dark. And we didn't really even know where we were at because we couldn't see. So we just kind of found the spot, and I built a fire with a log that was really long. So it kind of kept going all night, which was really great. I've never seen my dog so tired in all of her life. It was awesome.
So that was peaceful.
Oh my God. She freaked out. She freaked out because I swear a bear was standing behind me with how she freaked out, but it was probably just a lizard. And anyways, but it was and then I started my period that night out in the wilderness, and I thought, oh my God. And it's funny sleeping out exposed like that, because it was a bucket list for me to be able to just go out and sleep under the stars like that with my dog, and I did it. And looking up at the stars, and then I started my period, and I was like, oh my God, I don't have a tent. I mean, they're going to come eat me. I'm bleeding. I'm attracting the critters. I have a pit bull that's not going to do me any good.
Because she's tired.
Oh my God. It was so funny. We survived it. But boy, coming back, bleeding the next day was very intense. I mean, wow, her and I bonded. I realized that I could do things that I mean, that was physically very hard for me. I'm small. So carrying that much and in the heat and stuff. Thankfully, we ran into guys because it just was so hot that we drank way more water. And also, I think that you want to lighten your load, so you probably drink water more. So it's not as heavy. Did you have moments like that?
I did. You learn a lot about what you're capable of doing when you stretch yourself like that, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I think that's an interesting lesson when you backpack like you did, we need a lot less than we think we do. I lived for 7 weeks with 22 pounds and a backpack. Okay, two pairs of pants, 3 shirts, 3 pairs of underwear and socks, washing them daily in a sink with a bar of soap.
Right.
You talk about a humbling experience, right? We don't need fancy cars and, yacht harbor apartments and all this stuff to be truly happy.
Right.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not saying, but we can really get by with a lot less than we have, and our possessions weigh us down. And when you don't have possessions, and all you have is what you have on your back, and you're so grateful for a meal and a bed, right, and the trail in front of you, life becomes very simple. And when life is simple, you're at your happiest.
Yeah.
So,
and that is true. You don't need as much as you think you need.
You don't. Your possessions weigh you down. They do.
That's very true. And your first time going out, you always take too much.
Yeah, no, I don't have a rake. I don't have a bucket. I don't have a shovel. I don't have any of those things. Because I don't have a house anymore. They can bring us pleasure, and if those things bring you pleasure, your plants and your home and your space and your car and things, that's one thing. But we always surround ourselves with more than we need. Yeah. And so just balance that and take time for yourself. It's always been easy
to walk away from stuff for me, though, so that's good. I don't really hold much of an attachment to stuff. This is the most stuff I've had in many, 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 many years.
But I think a lot of people are just the opposite, and I think a lot of people stay in relationships that are dysfunctional because of their things, their possessions, and their financial intermingling. And so that's a whole other podcast. We don't need to discuss that right now, but it can be burdensome, very burdensome to have all of those things weighing you down.
Yeah, I agree. All right, you guys. So we have, Rickman, we've really enjoyed hearing your story.
Thanks for having me.
I've been very excited to sit here and just be able to listen and go through the steps with you. And it inspires me to want to do it. I love Europe. Maybe we'll all end up there together one of these trips.
Well, I would encourage you to try the Camino. I mean, it doesn't have to be the 36-day Camino. There's a lot of shortened versions of that, but if you like Spain and you like to backpack, and it sounds like you like both, I think you'd enjoy the Camino.
Well, it would just be good to get out there and do it.
Yeah.
Anyways, so thanks everybody out there.
What? Gratitude.
Lori has something to share. I am tired tonight. So actually, we like to end our podcast usually with something that we're pretty grateful for, or something that's happened to us. And I didn't even think of it. But Lori did. So Lori, you go ahead and start.
Well, one of the things that I've been really, really reflecting on is my relationship with my little Brody Mans. He's 12 and a half. And over the last
dog.
My dog. My dog.
So we don't, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Right. To keep it clear, those of you who know me know that I have my little Brody Mans, and he's been with me for 12 and a half years. And when I was at the coast, I overwalked him. And he's been in a little bit of pain. So I've been actually having to, I talked about slowing down with my own life, but the last 10 days I've been having to slow down with my dog and really be mindful of where he's at and what's going on in his world and his life. And so on our little walks every day, I've just been looking at we've had to slow our pace. I've actually had to take the elevator and not make him climb the 4 sets of stairs up and down. But what it's made me really grateful for is I've had this companion that has loved me unconditionally for the last 12 and a half years. And he still looks at me with his big brown eyes with such love and gratitude that I've just been thanking him for taking me on walks. The last
he's
few
gotten
days.
You out of the house for 12 years.
Right. And I'm just becoming aware of that, honestly. It's like, thank you for dragging my happy ass out of the house at least twice a day, 3 times to pee, but we go on 2 walks.
Yeah.
Rain, shine, snow, ice. He gets my happy ass out of the house, and he snuggles me, and he loves me, and he's always, always happy to see me. So I'm grateful for my little Brody Mans.
Yay. Yay, B-Man.
Great thought. Thanks for sharing.
I mean, I guess I got to go to the coast this week with my husband for a couple of days. It was nice. And my dog was so happy. She's such a snuggle bug that all the people out there were so happy about dog snuggles. And she's like, I will spend quality time with each of you. Don't worry. It was pretty cute seeing her happy. But yeah, just getting away was nice. Now I'm back, to the grind. Did anything cool happen to you this week, Rickman?
Tonight.
Oh, yay.
Oh, thank you.
Really, I mean, thank you for letting me share about the Camino. I'm still processing the whole experience, and sharing that experience with other people is really a fun thing to do. And then I've inspired some people to do the Camino, which is kind of cool. I want to go back and do it as well. But thanks for letting me share.
Once we make money with the real shit, then we'll be able to do things like that for sure.
There you go.
36 days off. Yay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, you two. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. Don't forget to go to our website, therealshit.net, and you can subscribe to our podcast. And also check out our 2 new campaigns. We are really pushing a couple different ones. One is Be a Nice Hole, which I actually came up with Rickman driving in Portland.
Very nice. Yes, I've seen.
It makes sense. And also we're trying to bring a lot more awareness to the psilocybin world and legalizing that for trauma patients. And so please take the time to hop over to our website and check out those 2 campaigns. Support our small business by ordering a t-shirt or a bumper sticker. It all helps.
Leave comments. We appreciate your feedback.
Yes. And so thank you. And don't forget to
Be a nice hole.